Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Hal Pollard, the Director of Education and Committees at IANA, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's program, Coping with Congestion. How can technology-powered visibility help address congestion? This is a sponsored webinar from IMC Companies, and we are really pleased to have them helping us out today, as well as our guests. We're going to talk about some really interesting stuff that I think a lot of you across the supply chain will be really interested in. Without any further ado, I am really pleased to be able to welcome two good friends, longtime IANA members and industry stalwarts, Diana Lem, who is the Chief Commercial Officer, and Joel Tracy, who is the Chief Information Officer of IMC Companies. Why don't you guys just introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about IMC Companies and a little bit of your experience before we dive into the conversation, because I think that it's always nice to kind of get a little bit of a level set.
Thank you, Hal. Joel, if it's okay, I'll go first. A little bit about IMC Companies. IMC Companies is the parent company. We're the largest marine drayage provider in the United States, and we serve every major port and railroad in the United States. For the sake of those of you that might recognize the shield, you might recognize our regional brands. I'll start in the South Atlantic with Atlantic Intermodal Services, H&M in the North Atlantic, D&J servicing the Midwest, IMCG, our founder and anchor company based in Memphis, Tennessee. And then as we move, also OIS, Ohio Intermodal Services, in the Ohio and ever-growing Ohio Valley, right? And then let's move to the Gulf Intermodal Services, servicing Mobile and Houston, New Orleans, and then to the West Coast, Pacific Drayage Services. We do have an operating company that offers our national customers national scale with IMCNA, IMC National Accounts. So it's a little perspective on our companies, and all rolled up, IMC Companies being our parent. Joel?
Hi, I'm Joel Tracy. Thanks, Hal, for hosting us today. I've been the CIO for IMC Companies for 7 years now, and it's gone by very quickly. In this ever-changing industry, technology is becoming more and more every day a necessity to keep ahead. And I think that's what we're going to talk about a lot today, is how technology can help, or how it is helping, especially in today's world of congestion and all the challenges that we have.
Share a little bit about your experience. Obviously, it's a family company that's got a long track record, and I'm sure a lot of people recognize, like you said, either the regional brands or the IMC kind of parent company. You are operating in a lot of, pretty much every market in the U.S., and a lot of those are challenging. So we'll be able to talk a little bit about how you guys have managed to succeed and grow in a challenging market and in a particularly challenging time, which has been the last 12, it's longer. We can dig in a little bit more on some of that on-ramp to the pandemic that created a number of challenges for folks. Why don't we start out by just kind of talking a little bit about some of your experiences, in particular, kind of in the last year, and what you've been faced with and how you responded.
My goodness, Hal, when you first approached us, right, it was about our experience with COVID, and then obviously the storm of congestion. And so, for today's discussion, I think perhaps it's best that we start from the beginning. And while you're right, it's more than a year, it's another new year. But if we take it back, even from the beginning, March of 2020, I'm looking at Joel, and it seems like just yesterday that first customer email came out. And the customer email said, goodness, as we are considering perhaps a pandemic moving from China to the US, how are you going to manage our freight? You'll all remember that first time that you thought, oh my goodness, we didn't know, we couldn't know. And so we assembled our executive team, but it was immediately all eyes on technology. And it became very apparent very quickly that we were going to have to figure out how we were going to keep this enterprise moving virtually. Kudos to Joel, to your team, and to all those technology teams across the United States who took us virtual. So Joel, let's just start there. I mean, security, cybersecurity, you had hardware issues, you had so many. Just briefly, let's talk about the beginning, because we'll roll into safety in a second, but that's where we started.
Yeah, I remember that phone call, by the way, and when it was becoming apparent that as portions of the United States were people were going to start working from home, and I think that we were very fortunate. IMC has long been an investor in technology, and although we were investing in technology for a completely different reason than a pandemic, we were fortunate to be able to reuse that investment to help us operate during a pandemic. And, that was the technology that we had been implementing for our customer service agents and dispatchers that allowed them to take their laptops and computers home and plug in and VPN in and keep working just like they were at the office. And we didn't even skip a beat when it came to that. Thank goodness we had invested heavily in VPN technology, but also our drivers. We had been investing in technology to improve their in-cab experience. We had no idea that a pandemic was coming. And so when we say, well, what does that mean, improve their in-cab experience? We were trying to keep them in the truck. I mean, it's hard enough to keep up with all the duties of an intermodal driver. That's a tough job. And how we were thinking of how can we make their job easier to prevent the number of times they got to get in and out of the cab. So we were investing in tablet technology, tablet software that they could communicate back and forth and receive dispatches, hazardous material documents that they would have on person in a moment's notice if needed, electronic bills of lading, proof of delivery, all that stuff that we were investing in. All of a sudden, the pandemic is like, hey, we can use this to keep them from having to exchange paperwork with customers, which now who wanted to touch anything early on in the pandemic when we didn't really understand how this thing was being transmitted.
Let me add on that for a second, Joel, because you're 100% right. The issue of safety of your workforce, safety of our drivers, safety for the customers, it becomes your focus. And you would be amazed at how manual our processes can be and our day-to-day for our drivers, how many times they have to get out of a truck, how many times they have to get out to say, can you sign this POD? On our export side, so many of our exporters waiting for those doors to close, drivers standing behind, waiting for the doors to close, seal, container number, bill of lading manually. All of those things, as Joel said, we had prepped for, but began proactively working with our customers. We want to protect your warehouse people, work with us. And, no doubt, everyone's resources were pulled. But in many instances, it was a welcome, proactive initiative that said, God, we never even thought about that. So those were the first steps and immediate steps. And thank goodness, as you say, Joel, many of those things we had programmed, but also the lesson learned here for us. There were still customers that just couldn't get it done. They wanted to. But it's this immediacy of this emergency that's pulling all of your resources in many different places. And so for us, the lesson learned is if you've got a great idea and you've got an efficiency, you've got to make time, because who knows what's around the corner, right? That was the early months. But what happened then by June, July, you will all remember the wave that came. And here's where, how we get to talk about congestion like we've never seen before. None of us on this call. What are we going to do with that? And again, we're turning to our technology team. And so in the wake of that congestion were real shortages, right, of our drivers. And so one of the things we want to talk about is you talked about briefly, Joel, was that driver experience, that in-cab experience that we try to make so pleasant and safe. It became an issue of optimizing the driver's time and optimizing our capacity for our shippers' demand that was just skyrocketing, right? Let's talk about our optimization engine and some of the things that we were able to do with our technology that really helped optimize our driver's time and still doing that.
Yeah. So again, we, like most motor carriers, had been investing in electronic logging technology for a number of years. But like most motor carriers, especially when we hit the mandate in December of 17, it's like we have all this neat technology in the cab. How can we capitalize on that? We now, we have this data that's coming to us constantly about how many hours does the driver have left for today. And so what we were trying to figure out is, and plus we have the GPS coordinates of the truck and what freight is that truck nearest to be able to optimize the driver's trips per day. We want to maximize the trips per day and minimize the empty bobtail miles. And so what we developed over time, which again, we were able to fully then capitalize during the pandemic, was our dispatch optimization algorithms, which says, hey, if you're going to send a driver into this port or this rail, you have them pick up this, take it here, but then there's this other container here that needs to return to this other location. And so what we are able to do is use our algorithms to string together the optimal morning, the optimal day for a driver. And so that we found that to be invaluable in making split-second decisions, especially if we detect through our data that a port or rail is backing up as far as the dwell time for the driver. If the queue is 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours long to get in, our algorithms are going to start alerting us that, hey, maybe you ought to send this driver over here to this other location and change the trip. And that's what we were able to do, which is, it's been huge in helping the efficiencies for us internally, but also our customer. Effectively, we're able to handle more freight.
So speaking of more freight, I'm going to switch gears for a second. Another immediate need from our customers is where to store these boxes that kept coming and keep coming, right? And we've got 48 locations across the United States for storage. And there are many motor carriers out there with a lot of opportunity to store. But this surge just kept coming. And we saw this triangulation of freight that had to be because two real reasons. One, this shortage of warehouse workers. And two, this surge in this buying that kept coming, right? And so we were tasked almost immediately to develop and offer new storage opportunities for our customers, like overnight. And we talk about our different markets when I started, because there were some markets that were more immediate than others. And the first one, of course, was the Pacific Southwest, the LA Long Beach Gateway. It was immediate. And it moved to New York, New Jersey, and it moved to Norfolk, and it moved to the South Atlantic. And then again, we turned to Joel. Our customers need, and our team, our customers needed visibility to that equipment. They needed to know the in-gate, the out-gate, the storage. We needed to be able to calculate that on a daily basis. And our timeline in ramping up a normal storage facility, we can break. Joel, talk about the window that the team had to begin to prepare the technology needed to store this kind of equipment.
Yeah, and I know in our audience we have a lot of people probably that are from the technology space or they're facility planners, and they know that when you go to open up a new facility, getting network connectivity to that new facility, it could take months. It could take, 2-3 months. And so when you've got customers that are asking you to, hey, can you create a depot in our area, our regions, because our distribution centers are backing up, or we don't have the capacity to take all the containers that are coming in. Can you store it at your facility? We had to open up container yards overnight. And so how do you do that? Well, we came up with what we called a kind of a depot in the box, and that depot in the box included wireless network gear, tablets, and wireless computers for the gates, and we could set up a depot in a matter of just a few days, and begin to transact and operate, and basically extend our container yard management system overnight into a new area that we hadn't operated in before. So we were, again, the situation forced us to be creative with what the technology that we had, and how could we use the investments that we'd made in other places for this new need, this new purpose.
So I can't help but also talk about too some of the investment that we had to make with lift equipment. The issue too became a shortage of chassis, and we had to do significant capital investment just even on lifts, the ability to ground. Where can we store? There were absolutely restrictions and guidelines about how high, and so all of that was indicative of the region where we're storing, and the immediacy of everything was just really, really mind-boggling. And so in a lot of ways, exhausting, but in the end, we were able to get it done. I just kind of shake my head and almost, you're smiling, I'm smiling because we survived, and we're keep moving.
And it's not over yet, right? I mean, the volumes continue to come, which is good for all of us in the transportation industry, right? We all love that. And I think it's just the way of the world nowadays, right? I mean, to survive in the transportation and logistics space and handle the myriad of transactions, and not only the transactions, but it's also custom transactions. Everybody doesn't do it the same way. And then on top of that, and I know we're going to maybe this is a good transition, when you're talking about gate closures at ports and rails, where all of a sudden, in a moment's notice, well, we're no longer accepting this type of equipment. Now you have to take it here. I mean, you have to automate. You're forced to automate. You cannot keep up with all of it with just manual labor.
I do think it's a good segue to just talk about some of the challenges that we have. We did so many amazing things, as did so many companies across the United States, right? But there's still challenges out there that we don't have answers for. Sure. We've got a lot of smart people on this phone conference, and perhaps collaboratively we will be able to sort this out. But I do want to touch on per diem. We definitely have the technology tools for visibility to our customers, for alerts to our customers. But you asked me a question, and you said, what is one of the biggest questions or needs your customers were asking? Well, the question was, and continues to be, why does it take so long to get my box back, right?
Yeah.
How many of those do I get a day, right? And the second question is, why couldn't you? Why couldn't you get in the gate? So what's interesting too is, again, looking to technology to help. The first help is basically to say why we couldn't. That doesn't solve the problem. It simply shares with the customer why we couldn't. Cameras loaded in our trucks so we can take pictures of the terminals. Pictures worth 1,000 words. Here, look at this. How many videos have we shared? Lines and lines long, telling the story, right? So the other issue becomes, how do we, using technology, how are we able to see a multitude of terminals all at the same time? We do have some technology certainly that we use today that helps us and gives us visibility through streaming what those terminals are doing. But not every region has the same tools available. And that's when it becomes, for us as IMC companies working from coast to coast, so obvious about some of the dynamics that may be different by region, right? And so what we don't have an answer to, and maybe in the Q&A, we'll even have folks that can comment, this whole idea of dual transactions. We have not been able to figure it out. We've got good matchback technology. We work with some applications. It's about size, it's about type, but more than that, it's what you said, Joel, when you started. At a minute's notice, we could be sent here only to be sent here within the hour. That's hard to do. It's really, really hard to do. So we wanted to talk about per diem. We did. We're going to talk a little bit about chassis, just like per diem with chassis usage. We have the ability to share with our customers who are not billed directly by their chassis providers. Many are. We have the ability to share visibility to chassis usage at all times. But again, this issue of return, chassis usage and per diem go hand in hand. How are you able to, why couldn't you get back in? Why did it take so long? And this is certainly something that is on all of our minds to try and tackle. Somebody asked the question about Demerged, detention Demerged, number one issue in America.
And that's another area, Donna, that we're spending a lot of time with automation and automating, detecting when a container is in demurrage. And so you want to make sure that the payment is made so the driver doesn't make a dry run to go over there only to get turned away. So we've developed technology to automate that and still are perfecting that. It's not perfect, but we're having to make investments there because, again, the demurrage situation, demurrage and storage, it's just gone through the roof. You didn't have as much of this a year ago. And now with all the volume of freight coming into the country, it's just a fact of life that you better check. Your systems better be combing to make sure that everything's paid and ready to go. So when the driver gets there, they're not detained.
So true. The other big challenge too is how many exceptions there are. A motor carrier is not privy to the contract terms between a shipper and a carrier. And in the case of per diem, where a shipper is willing, a 3PL willing and wants to share the parameters, that's great. We plug those into our system. We can audit, we can track, trace all day long, give reports, give alerts. But in the case of demurrage, where that is a contractual discussion between a shipper, right, and an ocean carrier, the motor carrier is not engaged in that contract. And so that becomes a very sensitive area. We get stuck in the middle a ton. But as Joel said, for many of our customers who are suffering, we have had to do exactly what you just said. Figure out how we're going to be able to report this back and waiting for that container to be green light ready. Go get it, right?
Yeah. If you think about it, just not so many years ago, you think about it, it was a simple world, right? You could just send your driver over to pick up freight. They go pick it up and pull it out, pull the container out. But now think about it in today's world. You've got to make an appointment. It's got to be a dual transaction. So they want you going in with an empty and so you got to coordinate returns with a pickup of an import. You've got to be using technology to detect demurrage. You got to keep track of your customers' chassis and per diem agreements. Just the total complexity of being able to handle all of that, those moving pieces, and then assemble it and send an invoice to your customer with all the proof of documentation that you did all those things. it's highly complex. And, wouldn't it be nice to simplify that? That's going to take industry collaboration. We don't have all the answers for that. And that's something that I think that I would like to see come out of all of this when we all have a chance to take a deep breath following all of this. Wouldn't it be nice if we all collaborate together to improve all this and simplify this again?
Agreed.
I'm fascinated by how you were able to incorporate those sort of non-IMC centric elements into your system because they're critical. Even though you're not privy to those shipper contracts, you do need to know the demurrage, at least the dates and the charges, so you can stay on top of that. Similarly, I'm assuming with like box rules for chassis, do I need to bring my own? Can I, will you have one? Will I be able to do a dual transaction on it, or is it a one-way trip on that particular, all those elements? I'm just fascinated that you figured out a way to, as best you can, build those into your system, even though it's not your data per se, but you've got to act on it. That's a pretty tall order. So I can imagine that you spent a lot of challenging programming nights trying to figure out how to make that work and get the handshakes to match up.
That's right. I just saw one of the questions in the chat. How do we capture that documentation and prove it to our customers? I mean, just as simple as paying a demurrage bill, right, at a port website or whatever, it's going to go to your credit card, right? You maybe get some brief snap of us on a screen when you're paying that bill with a credit card, and then it goes away. It's like, oh man, I wanted to capture that so I could show the customer that I paid that bill, right? We've had to develop technology to take it as soon as that flash occurs on the screen with the receipt. We had to develop technology to capture that image and store it in our imaging system. So it always 100% of the time gets captured. That, it seems trivial, but it's a big deal when you want to be reimbursed from your customer for handling that for them. That's just how complex this has gotten. It's almost a bit ridiculous what you have to do these days. But that's the fact of the motor carrier in the intermodal world, where we're kind of caught in the middle.
Am I right in thinking that generally your process is pay the demurrage, the detention, pay that bill in advance, capture that, and then sort it out on the back end, so you're not slowing the transaction down for the driver?
Well, let me interject here for a second, because demurrage is a very interesting subject, and in most cases, very large BCOs they're paying the demurrage themselves, right? 3PLs paying the demurrage themselves. In cases where we are asked and have agreements with our customers for storage and some demurrage, we will, for service, provide that service for our customer, right? And Joel, I'll let you take it from there. I just wanted to be clear, demurrage and storage, these are huge animals. They're huge. And again, a pretty sensitive subject.
I'm done. I would just add that, we do that as a service, right? You're right. Many of our customers, the bigger customers, they handle that on their own. But a lot of customers don't have that complexity, and they rely on us, and we provide that as a service. And we're happy to do that. I'm just pointing out the technology that we've had to do for those customers that need it. And that's just, part of the business now. But what was your question specifically on? Am I touching on what you wanted?
Yeah, I was just curious on how you flex your systems to kind of pull in so these transactions that you're handling sort of on behalf of your customers, how you're pulling in this sort of third party transactions into your system.
We're using RPA technology for a lot of that. Obviously, we way prefer to use API technology, but not every port or rail offers that.
Right.
Some do, some don't. And certainly I think API technology is growing in use as, different platforms sort of begin to get used in these different areas. Artificial intelligence is another thing that we're doing. Somebody asked in the chat, are we using AI technology?
Right.
And the answer is yes. We're using it more on like to handle driver questions, driver recruiting, types of questions that are coming into our websites and things like that. But we also, our dispatch optimizer is sort of AI-ish, right? We're trying to incorporate more and more AI technology into that. But I think, AI is something that I think everybody wants to use more of. It's just not, it doesn't go as fast as you want in adopting that type of technology, but it is growing and we are investing in that space.
That makes sense. And there is an interesting question that just came in about in this sort of collaborative space that you're finding yourselves having to work with your technology. So making your technology fit needs of folks that may or may not actually be your customers, or maybe they're your customers, but it's not necessarily your data. They're asking, have you looked at things like shared dashboards, blockchains, extended mobile apps, things like that you're bringing, third parties into sort of your space? Because it is really it's the challenge of the motor carrier, right? Is you're operating in a lot of other people's spaces, but it's, your systems are yours.
Well, the answer is yes.
All of the above, right, Donna?
Yeah.
We're using, there's no one answer, right? You got to do a little bit of all of that. So we have developed our own mobile apps, but we're also using other third-party apps. Our dispatch tablet, our tablet that we give to all of our drivers, has third-party software on it that we did not develop. But the smartphone app that our drivers use at home was developed by us. So we're kind of using a mixture there. Whatever solution fits the need.
Yeah.
And we make a business case decision. Is there something on the market? And if there is, because of speed, we're going to go buy that and we're going to use that. If there's nothing on the market that fits our needs, we're going to develop it ourselves and move on. And then in such time down the road, if something better comes along, we'll switch to it. It's just that simple. What we're doing is we're trying to solve supply chain problems for our customers. Our customers come to us constantly every week with a challenge that they're trying to solve. And we sit down together. I think that's really what we're very good at. We sit down with our customers and listen to them. And what is your challenge and what are you trying to solve? And then we figure out, okay, well, how about this? And we'll work together with them and we'll make operational changes and we'll add technology onto that, integrate with them if we need to solve a long-standing problem that they maybe have been struggling with.
Oh, that's exactly right. And that actually, Hal, that was another thing that you had asked, what's the process? It's very straightforward. It means in this environment, virtually coming together to talk about what the problem is, right? But we're mapping that, we're dialoguing, and it takes a commitment from both sides. And what we've seen, and to our delight, is there's this real understanding too of the value that the motor carrier brings to the table. And what we see in this congested, and we'll call it critical environment, is priority. Let's get this done. Let's get this integration done. How quickly can we ramp up? And this is the upside, and this is the silver lining. We're able to do these things pretty quickly, where maybe in a traditional environment could have taken months. But knowing where your freight is today, last mile, first mile, it's just critical. So agreed.
Yeah. Don't mean to keep sidetracking you, but we're really getting into kind of the meat of a lot of this is from the customer's perspective. What kinds of things were you hearing from them apart from, we covered the start. How are you guys going to flex to keep our freight coming on time? And then that next question of, we're adding this technology. What was that conversation like with your customers in terms of getting them more engaged in that whole process, so they had a better understanding of both how it was working, sort of as we kind of sometimes refer to it, the sausage making, right?
The process was, like I said, it was a very pleasant experience and continues to be, as customers are eager to, one, have full visibility, two, they need help. They need immediate help. And so these tools that we have, IM Compass, our visibility tool, the tools for per diem, the tools, as Joel mentioned, even for awareness, alertness on Demerged, all of these things are paramount on our customers' mind. How can you help?
Yeah, and I would just add that the crux of your question is what do we do to our customers? How do we get our customers to adopt our technology? Usually it's the other way around. They're coming to us with a problem, and it's usually around them trying to improve efficiencies in their company. And when they come to us, we'll open up our toolbox and we'll try to reuse the tools that we've already developed, but we aren't afraid to engage to develop something creative, especially if we think that there's reuse potential elsewhere. And I think that's the key there. Everybody's trying to improve efficiencies and eliminate manual steps in the supply chain. And that's what we're trying to accomplish as well. And I think that's what sets us apart from others. And we've got a large IT shop to be able to handle those type of questions and needs. But it's not easy. And every time you do something, you have to think about the info security side of it. You've got to be careful about how you go about these things, and will it scale? Will it scale? I mean, something that works for 50 containers a week doesn't work for 500 containers a week, maybe.
Well, let's talk about that too. One of the things we haven't talked about is just this volume, right? And so, we saw some customers moving, let's say 1,000 loads a year. It's 10,000 loads a year. And so another thing where we had to really turn to technology for assistance was, what do we do with this huge amount of volume in reporting? Okay, this is not news to any technology group on this call. Help. And this kind of bulk reporting, that we immediately had to do 10 times the volume that perhaps we had seen a year ago today. Joel, I mean, we just keep throwing it at you. And just things like normal everyday reporting that our technology teams have had to just create new and better ways that you can make it more efficient for us. Labor is at a shortage, even hiring good people. So we turned to our technology team to say, okay, help us improve our own internal efficiency with this growing freight volume.
I use the analogy of pipes. You don't have very leaky pipes when the pressure is not high, but when the volume of water going through those pipes starts to greatly increase, you start to see cracks and leaks in those pipes that you didn't see before. And that's exactly what we saw in our own internal systems. We're not perfect. And what we had to do was shore up some of those areas. And it really shined a spotlight on efficiencies, even internally, that we've had to make to keep up with the volume. And I'm sure that many others on the phone or on the call here today have felt the same thing.
For sure. Everybody's in it in some way, shape, or form. You do have the challenge of operating in so many of the markets that they're all experiencing congestion, some of them in slightly different ways than others.
Just today, call from our Chicago team. It's tough. Memphis, tough. Wait times, long, really long, right? And what's an interesting dynamic for me too, is just this tidal wave that comes in, how long it takes as it gets to the interior. The interior goes down, like we are today in Chicago and Memphis, and not down, just terribly congested. And it's just a matter of this wave as it moves in, ebbs, and comes back again. The timing. I read that's one of the phenomena that was realized was just maybe how long sometimes the supply chain takes to hit. And for me, it was I really thought that the interior would feel this critical congestion earlier than it did. And I mentioned early on in this discussion how we felt it first on the West Coast, naturally, as the largest gateway. We felt it as our growing gateways on the East Coast. We saw it. But it was interesting to me to watch the dynamic of how long it took to get to the interior. But it was the same thing when it did. And so as we talk today on this day, the calls are, right now it's Chicago and it's Memphis. It's the interior. So to your point.
Do you attribute some of that to the continued sort of adoption of transloading on the coast to, at least initially, that may have buffered a little bit of that wave? Or do you see it as something, slightly difficult to characterize?
That's a great point. And certainly there's a tremendous amount of transloading going on. But I also think that we take our eye off how this freight moves inland, how it rails out this bunching of trains. It's a natural thing that's been happening, as these vessels bunched, and it took longer perhaps to unload, and this waiting, this alignment of these even rail assets. We're just watching. And the same bunching that happened with vessels as they waited to berth, the bunching then moves into the interior. And so the average transit times continue to grow.
Yeah, I like your analogy of the wave, that sort of, it's pushing in and it's pushing across all the players in the supply chain, and everyone's struggling. And then it gets to the destination, and then there's an issue, and then it kind of flows back, and it's sort of a reverse challenge with such huge volumes that don't seem to be abating anytime soon. Let's just sort of transition over straight into me hectoring you with some questions. You guys have done a great job so far. We've got some questions flowing in, and here's one that just popped up. Does IMC Companies monitor the location of containers via telematics?
Yes, we do, but you got to keep in mind that many of the containers that we handle are on third-party chassis, pooled chassis that have no GPS device on them. Now, we do have many that are our chassis, and on those, yes, we do monitor those with the ones that are chassis that we own. Now, what we do is when we pull a container, we have the GPS coordinates of the truck. And so then when we pick up and we drop, we're dropping breadcrumbs, and that we show on our websites or customer portals that allow the customer to see, where do we pick up, where did we deliver, is that container at their yard, is it at our yard, where is that? And we do share that. We also share electronically via EDI and API when the container is in transit. So when it's in transit, when it's moving, we're sending GPS events to our customers so that they can ingest that into whatever platform they're using.
Yeah, that was what I was guessing, is there's an element of, again, going back to that, you own a piece of the entire puzzle, and how can you use your piece to extrapolate out the missing pieces?
That's right.
It makes sense. I've got one in terms of, because I'm really interested in the experience you folks had when you were working with shippers, with your customers. And when you started this process, particularly with kind of rolling out new technology, were there any particular kind of tricky handles that your customers were putting out to you in terms of the kinds of things that they were looking for? Or how they wanted to receive it that made it a challenge for you guys?
We have so many different customers with different perspectives and different priorities, right? And it depended on what service we were providing for them. So many different answers there. Again, I was just delighted at the immediacy of our teams to begin to work together. Success happens only when both teams are working together. And just like all of us, though, I mean, there were times when customers were pulled. The immediacy for some customers for just meet demand. Can you give me capacity, right? And so it was the sending of the 204s and then the status messages, the 214s for visibility. All of those integrations are things that we do in our sleep. The issue becomes resources.
Right.
Number one issue, demand. Can you help? Can you service? We talked about depots, the immediacy needed to have visibility to that equipment. And Joel's team being able to successfully coming back. We do have a great tool that provides visibility, as Joel talked about, that we can bring on a customer at any time. And so nothing there. I'm talking about IM Compass, and it's what you said about sending EDI and API information back out so that customer has visibility. So my comments, just our customers' needs were very, number one issue though, was demand on capacity and the ability to be able to tender those orders electronically where they could. And that, of course, that integration just requires both teams working as quickly as possible to get that going. So, Joel?
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered it. I think it does boil down to the mainly it's all about visibility and transparency in the supply chain. Where is my shipment? And you know, the people want that earlier and earlier and earlier, even when it's on the water. And so, you know, we have done everything we can to help our customers obtain visibility through our tracing and tracking systems and abilities. And again, we're using some of our own technology and some third-party technology to accomplish that. We're, you know, collapsing a lot of things to make all that happen. Again, trying to make that easy on our customers so that we can provide that visibility all the way back even into their systems if needed, if that's what they want. And I think it's even when it's at rest, where, you know, if it's in our yard, where is that thing? And if it's in our pool, their pool, they want to see a list of their pool, right? And so that's, you know, just another side of what we've had to do to make them comfortable that they know where their shipment is, which is usually worth a lot of money. And you can't blame them for that.
For sure. Yeah, without a doubt. Here's an interesting question from one of the attendees. Real-time data relies heavily on driver updates. What efforts do you have in place that either make it easier and or faster for drivers to update or relieve them of that duty where it's feasible?
It's a very, very good question. And it's one that we struggle with as ourselves, like everyone else is, because, you know, going back to that in-cab experience, if you can obtain a document electronically, then you shouldn't be forcing your driver to take a picture of it, such as a gate in or a gate out receipt at a rail site. Most rail sites allow you to download that document. You don't need to take a picture of it anymore. And some people aren't even offer paper documents anymore. It's all electronic and it sends an email to the driver. And so what we've done is we've worked with our drivers to have them, when they register for rail sites, they register with our imaging system email ID. And so those emails with gate receipts are going straight into our imaging system. And then when that occurs, it takes that responsibility off of them, and that required document falls off their list. We're using rail data services to capture gate in, gate out activity. Again, trying to eliminate the need any way we can so that we're taking that requirement off the driver to capture that document and that interaction or that data event. Because if we can even capture the data of an arrival or a departure electronically, they don't have to then key it into their tablet. And it's kind of like, you know, getting your bank statement from the bank. They're usually right. if there's, it's usually you that have made a mistake keeping your own check register. It's the same way. Why wouldn't you just trust the rail data or the port data? Because it's usually going to be right. And so we just eliminate that need from the driver. So that's a very good question. And that's something that we work on constantly, is obtaining new data streams to eliminate that.
That makes loads of sense. Here's a quick question just about your model. You know that you've got a national footprint with a lot of regional operators. Do you guys use owner operators? Do you use company drivers? A mix? What's your operating model like on the driver's side?
A blended model. It's definitely a blended model. It's 100% our trucks, our drivers on the West Coast. But the rest of the United States does have a blended model. Some stronger fleet representation, dedicated fleet representation than others. But it's a great model and it works great for us and for our drivers.
Yeah, I'm sure it gives you the right flexibility you need where it happens. We're coming up on the end, but I do have one other question, and this is sort of a bigger picture about your technology roadmap prior to the pandemic, and then what the pandemic did. And you mentioned initially that you were able to piggyback a lot of the stuff you were already working on to quickly kind of put that in place to help solve some of the problems. But overall, what did the pandemic do to alter your technology roadmap writ large?
It certainly accelerated it. Right. So I think it validated a lot of the investments that we were making in technology. And it gave us that shot of adrenaline to encouragement, confidence to carry on and keep investing even more. And I'll tell you another byproduct of all this is the collaboration. I have seen a tremendous increase in collaboration with ports, the rails, our customers, brokerage, business units, even our competitors. It seems like this has really helped us all focus on the important things that, here we are, we're helping the nation, right? There's basically the transportation and logistics area, the industry is supporting our nation right now, in my opinion. Yep. And I think that we're all working very hard together to collaborate to improve things. I just hope that we take this and we carry on with it, that this doesn't end, that this level of collaboration will continue into the coming years.
That makes loads of sense. And I certainly have seen an increased level of collaboration in at least certain areas for sure. And I share your hope that we can all continue to work together to improve efficiencies, fluidity, and safety, because that's sort of what it always comes back to. And I know that that's a lot of what you're based on, and the part of your success model is focusing on those bread and butter elements that kind of just make everything work better. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I really appreciate you guys spending some time today, making this possible for our attendees. We really appreciate you sponsoring. Just a note that you kind of ended on, Joel. You guys represent motor carriers and specifically drivers, and they have kept our economy going for the last year under ridiculously challenging circumstances. And I want to thank you so that you can pass that on to your drivers and everybody that's on, to thank them for doing that hard work of keeping us clothed and fed and entertained when we were kind of locked away in a really challenging time. And so thank you to them for the work that they have done. With that, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to encourage everybody to check out our website, intermodal.org. There's a lot of good information on there. There's also a link to intermodalexpo.com. If you click on that, it'll take you over to the Expo site, and you can learn about what's coming for Expo, including how to register. And if you haven't heard, we are going to be back in Long Beach in September of this year, face-to-face. We all are looking forward to seeing Joel and Donna and everybody on the call and everybody across the supply chain to come back out and celebrate with us as we celebrate 30 years of serving the intermodal industry as IANA, but also just celebrating the fact that we can get back together again. And do it in a great transportation hub of Long Beach. And with that, I will thank you two for your time. Thank our attendees again for spending their time with us. And I will leave you with that. So thanks for joining us at IANA, the connecting force behind intermodal freight.